All right, everyone, there's a couple exciting Nintendo Switch stories we have to talk about today, starting with the reason that Metroid fans are expecting a Prime 4 reveal around the corner. Then the big talking point for today's video has to do with Nintendo Switch Online Plus expansion pack, specifically the N64 emulation issues that we have covered numerous times on the channel, and why Nintendo may have just quietly updated and fixed one of the big fan complaints. What's up, Nation? If it's your first time on the channel, make sure you join Sunbro Nation by subscribing below, hit the like button on this video if you enjoy it today, and make sure you turn on your bell notification icon so you're kept up to date with all the newest gaming news. Now, as I mentioned, guys, we got a couple different stories to cover today, and we have to kick it off with a conversation around Metroid Prime 4 and the reason that just as of yesterday, fans started freaking out expecting a soon reveal. As just to give you a quick history lesson on this game, it was originally unveiled to us in 2017 with just a logo and a statement that it was now in development. Then a couple years in after that announcement, we had, of course, that dreaded Nintendo Direct update where they did say that they had to completely scrap and restart development, and that it would be going over to Retro Studios, who had actually developed the other three Prime games. I kind of wish Nintendo would have just started with Retro, but apparently they were, using a different studio. And then when they did their quality check a couple years in, they were just not happy with the direction of that game. And we don't, to be fair, know that everything was scrapped, but it definitely sounds like it was a full-on restart from all accounts. And since then, Metroid Prime fans have been eagerly awaiting any kind of glimpse of any type of gameplay, even an updated splash screen logo. Like, we literally have gotten nothing in terms of official news for this game since the original 2017 unveiling and then the announcement of the restart later on. And of course, now you have things like every time Retro Studios posts new jobs that reference Metroid Prime 4, that is what fans are looking for some type of news source, as it just becomes a big ongoing discussion and debate on whether or not this game is going to be coming out soon, or if we still have a long road ahead of us. And of course, the reason that it is being talked about so much here recently is Retro Studios went to Twitter and updated their banner. And what is it? It is a look at maybe a Metroid Prime 4 screenshot. I don't necessarily think it's that, but it's definitely new Metroid Prime inspired artwork. And there's some interesting tidbits when you look at this image on screen that a lot of fans have started to point out, and that is the fact that it almost looks like you were looking through a visor, maybe Samus's visor, but then that would raise the question on if you were looking through her visor because of that shadow effect and kind of a slight reflection there, who are you looking at if that's the case? Because that definitely looks like Samus off in the distance. And is this just some kind of fan art that they decided to go ahead and choose as their banner, or is this a little slight tease and glimpse of maybe some kind of story element for what we might expect for Metroid Prime 4? That is all up clearly for debate and speculation at this point. There's no official news outlets that have cracked what this is, or if this is anything more than Retro just updating a banner at the end of the day, but it's still fun to speculate and talk about when we can really expect the next update. And if I'm a betting man, I think that's no sooner than E3. I don't think they do it on a standalone event like a Twitter drop. Here's your first look at Metroid Prime 4. Like, clearly the hype is so built up around this game, and we're coming off of a very successful installment with Metroid Dread, that Nintendo will clearly want to give this game its own full segment in a direct when it is ready to be presented. And E3 just makes the most sense for the next update. And it might be something where they show us a quick gameplay trailer, or at least just an acknowledgement that it is doing well and still progressing in development. And then we may see something like the Prime 1 remake announcement, because clearly if they're still hiring various positions for Metroid Prime, and they are, I wouldn't expect it to be a 2022 game at all. I definitely think 2023 is the earliest we see it, and we really don't know if it may even take longer than that. But I would start to expect some kind of update for this game in the upcoming near future, and then I think we get that official, heavily rumored and quote unquote leaked Prime 1 remake. And I think that that's how you get the fans reinvested or brought into the Prime series for the first time, because it's hard to believe, but Prime 1 was released over 20 years ago, or exactly 20 years ago in the year of 2022, which is just a crazy statement, because I feel like it was yesterday that I was playing that game for the first time. But I guess that's what happens as you age. It just, time keeps moving faster. But I couldn't be more hyped to jump back into Metroid Prime, all of the games. Like, I've literally been waiting and trying to not replay Prime 1, 2, or 3 as I own all those games, and I've just been patiently waiting some kind of re-release information and some kind of update for Metroid Prime 4, so I know when to start that playthrough. I certainly hope that as we wait for Metroid Prime 4 that we ultimately do see 1, 2, and 3 re-released to the Switch, because as I mentioned, you have to bring in new fans that were not there on the GameCube era and the Wii era that they could have maybe experienced the first time around when those Prime games launched. So I want to hear from you guys in the comments down below what direction you think Nintendo is going for the Prime franchise. When do you think we get the next update or trailer for Metroid Prime 4? And do you think that we're still getting that heavily rumored Prime 1 remake, or do you think it's just going to be a curveball and it's actually Prime Trilogy HD, 3 games brought over in one Switch cartridge? So I want to hear from you guys on all your thoughts and feelings on Metroid Prime in the comments down below. Now, the other story we're talking about today has to do once again with Nintendo Switch Online Plus expansion pack, and specifically a conversation around the N64 games and the emulation quality. As if you've been around on the channel for a while, you will not be surprised with my stance on this, that I was originally very critical of the N64 game editions as we saw them rolled out, as it was a $50 annual price point. Of course, you had the Animal Crossing DLC, which really didn't mean much to me at all, and I was curious to see if that was the only DLC or if more would be added in later. And of course, we now have that portion answered, which helps soften the blow when it comes to price point in a big way, in my opinion. However, there's still been continuing gripes and complaints when it comes to N64 games and the way they look and run as part of the service, most notably with Ocarina of Time, with things like very obvious lack of fog rendering. When you look at things like the Deku Tree in Kokori Forest, the fog's not rendered. You can see the tree clear as day. It doesn't have quite the same environmental effects and atmospheric effects as the original release. And of course, when you're messing with a fan classic, timeless game like Zelda Ocarina of Time, people are going to notice things like that. There was also heavy input delay when you would press your button or try to change the direction of the analog stick that you could feel as you're traversing through the game, which was definitely the biggest drawback in my opinion, and you can argue that it still needs to be updated further. And then there's of course the broken textures and things that just didn't look right, such as the infamous water temple room that has since been somewhat upgraded and definitely a step in the right direction, but still not as good as it looked on the original game, and then again in the GameCube iteration, or the GameCube port rather, that we saw come over later on. So there's been a lot of back and forth on whether or not Nintendo will continue to improve this NSO N64 emulation, or if it will kind of just be where it's at forever. And the good news is, and what I will heavily continue to commend Nintendo on, is progress in the right direction over the course of time, because they are actually addressing some of these issues with incremental updates. Most recently, when we got the Banjo and Kazooie edition, we did see them go in and at least partially fix that water issue in the water temple in Ocarina of Time. The input delay was claimed to be reduced at least slightly by different speedrunners and people who did the frame-by-frame comparisons, and so it was at least a step in the right direction in terms of overall quality on these games. Now, of course, one thing that was not fixed or even tinkered with at all is the fog rendering, and you can still clear as day see that it has not changed at all in Ocarina of Time since we got the original release. And I was very concerned personally this entire time on that situation, specifically with Majora's Mask, because if you are a fan of that game like I am, you will want the environments to be as nostalgic as possible, and that game does such an incredible job of creating a dark, eerie world, and the fog effect is a big part of that, far more than it is for Ocarina of Time, in my personal opinion. So I am very relieved to see, at least in the trailer, and I want to make that a big asterisk on this whole conversation, because Nintendo could put out a trailer that looks different than the final product that we are playing, but we do have some side-by-side comparison videos. I will have Game Explained side-by-side comparison video briefly up on screen, but also linked in the description down below under the sources section if you guys do want to watch the entire thing, so you can see each frame side by side and see exactly what has been changed. But one thing that is very clear is that the fog rendering tinkering effect is intact, at least at the time of this trailer's release, which is a big deal because it could signify that whatever Nintendo has done to this emulator to fix things like the water texture in the Ocarina of Time, it was actually just a new version of the emulator that fixed that. It wasn't necessarily tinkering with the files in Ocarina of Time, as data miners did confirm that. So that means that we could be on a path that as these games continue to get released, that just the core emulator itself continues to get updated, and we may see it trickle back to all of the previous games that had issues with things like fog or just textures that weren't loading in correctly. Like ultimately at the end of the day, or whenever we get further into the life of this NSO Plus expansion pack, we could be living in a world where input delay is fully minimized and not noticeable or not there at all, and we could be living in a world where all of the textures work just as good as we remember them on the original releases. Fog rendering is intact, and it's just a great experience with clearly a higher resolution at the end of the day. Now, there is one gripe I've noticed from fans online when talking about the way that Majora's Mask looks and performs, and that is that there is a transparency effect that is very apparent in the N64 version, whereas it's not necessarily there in the NSO version, and you can most notably see it when the energy effect is going on around Majora's Mask itself. Like, I can definitely see that lack of transparency, but I will tell you personally, as much as I would love it to be a one-to-one copy of the original, that to me does not look like a major problem, and it wouldn't take me out of the gameplay experience the same way it would if I was walking through that initial forest, looking at that opening cutscene and just seeing everything clear as day with no fog. So I will not nitpick on that particular part. I know some fans may still be bothered by that. I think that is very minor compared to the other issues we've seen with the service overall. So the biggest question we have to wait for until February 25th is, will this launch with a new emulator update that will fix things like the fog in Ocarina of Time? I am hopeful that the answer to that question is yes, but obviously that is not confirmed at this point in time, and we also have to monitor the input lag situation and see if they've either reduced it even further, or if maybe in Majora's Mask it runs perfectly without input delay or anything that is at least noticeable. And then one last thing I want to quickly rant about on Nintendo with the N64 Online expansion pack is, like, where the heck are the N64 controller restocks for all the people who didn't get it the first time it was launched? Like, we are well into the second half of February 2022. The only thing we've had on Nintendo's website is that the next restock wave would happen in 2022, and it's been since the end of October that controller was sold and then sold out. And it's like, I think they may have had one restock wave randomly, and since then nobody can get their N64 controller, and we still don't have button mapping that needs to be added into the service as well. So that's one complaint, because if you don't own an N64 controller, it's not as good of a gameplay experience, and you have to go into your Switch system settings to actually, remap around your buttons to make it the fully enjoyable experience the way you want to. So I really hope Nintendo gets the ball rolling with N64 controller production. It's not like that's a brand new design. It's literally almost exactly the same as what the original controller was, but that's neither here nor there. I just feel for you guys. I've seen a lot of people comment saying that they've been waiting this entire time to get a restock, and I've continued to check the store page, and it's like always been under maintenance recently, which is also interesting, but I don't know when we're getting the next wave of N64 controllers. So hopefully we get some communication around that from Nintendo soon. But I want to hear from you guys at this point in the video, how you feel about things as we've slowly progressed with the N64 Online Plus expansion pack service and the game specifically on how they run. Are you happy to see the fog is apparently intact from the trailer, or are you skeptical that maybe when we actually boot up this game that the fog really doesn't render in an actual gameplay? Because that still remains to be seen. So I want to hear from you guys on all your thoughts and feelings on both the stories we talked about in the comments down below, as I do look forward to getting a back and forth conversation started with you all around this topic. Make sure you check out yesterday's video if you haven't already, where we go over the exact announcement and release date for Majora's Mask. Also, make sure you please like, subscribe, turn on your notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.